Huh. The third dimension. I assume it's what you're seeing on the screen right now. Height, width, and depth. Crazy as it is to think, the concept of a pure three-dimensional video game was kind of unpalatable back in the mid-90s. I mean, sure, you had the odd Wolfenstein 3D or Space Harrier, but those weren't really true 3D or true polygonal 3D. And even something like Star Fox, bless its heart, just didn't have the frame rate to try and do something as crazy as real three-dimensional gameplay. So when the next generation of consoles finally came out, you had a lot of games that could manage to get that 3D level, but they couldn't master it quite yet. You had a lot of Castlevania 64s, a lot of Bubsy 3Ds, and a lot of Mega Man Legends, games that could technically run in 3D, but weren't really fun or engaging in a three-dimensional manner. This also makes it so mind-blowing that one of the first true 3D games ever is also mechanically timeless enough to land on the number 9 spot. I mean, who knew Super Mario 64 was still so much damn fun? Consider the design of a 2D Mario level. It's a flat obstacle course. You go from point A to point B. There is some variation depending on where you want to go, and if you go looking, there's a shortcut to a later level, but it's very linear. This works in 2D because the only real dimensions are vertical and horizontal. You can only really go right or up, or down if you miss a jump. You can't really make a world very open unless A, you make it a sprawling spaghetti mess like Metroid, or B, you give it an isometric perspective. When you see a purely 2D, non-isometric game like Super Mario Bros., you're basically seeing an illusion. The player's point of view is constricted so much so that they have to focus on the task at hand, which is typically moving right. And you can't recreate this in real life. I mean, if you tried to squeeze this video footage into 2D, it just wouldn't work. You couldn't record that in real life. When you give the game an isometric perspective, though, things change. It's like seeing a line turning into a square. You have more directions to move and breathe, so you want to do that. I mean, when you think about the biggest difference between something like Super Mario and something like Zelda or Ultima, the biggest change is the camera angle. When you change that camera angle to reveal more of the world, it feels larger. It makes the player want to stretch and venture wherever they want. You can give them a goal to move towards, but you can bet that psychologically they'll want to see what's around the area first. This is the kind of radical paradigm shift that every game in the big 3D leap had to worry about. When you reveal the third axis, you have no choice but to expose the ground underneath the player character. And when it comes to Mario, that changed everything. The very core idea of a Mario game didn't work in 3D, so what had to change? What kind of game did Super Mario 64 have to become without abandoning its platformer roots? See, this is the kind of ingenious thinking that lands a game on my list of favorites. Nintendo knew they couldn't just adapt a point A to point B formula into pure 3D. You want to go around, you want to explore, you want to do stuff. But would Mario really work as a fully 3D open world where you get to do anything you want? No, of course not. The advent of the collectathon formula in Mario 64 was crucial for its success. It's a bridge between linear challenge and free exploration. Let's look at Bob-omb Battlefield as an example. As soon as the player enters the painting for the first time, you see the words, Big Bob-omb on the summit. The player is given an explicit goal for this particular challenge. However, when the player enters the world, there's collectibles and distractions everywhere. Red coins, boxes, 2 alternate paths, Goombas. It's a lot for the player to take in. The summit from the title of the level is there, clearly visible in the distance, but the player is encouraged to explore and get a lay of the land. That's brilliant. It's embracing the old Mario tradition, but at the same time it's design that acknowledges the player's desire to explore a wide-open 3D space. and the entire rest of the game is like this, with very few exceptions. Just look at how Mario controls. It would be easy to just put run and jump in there and that's it, but Mario can flip, crawl, sneak, grab onto ledges, dive, fly, swim, and all sorts of other crazy acrobatic stuff. And the levels accommodate for that, because when the player is in a 3D world, they don't just want to run and jump. This is what separates Mario 64 from other games like Sonic Adventure or Crash Bandicoot, or even future Mario games like Galaxy or 3D World. The game is designed around the idea of a huge world with lots of objectives and challenges that can be explored at the player's own pace, instead of linearly, which is how 3D works in the first place. When I first look at a giant park like this, I see a lot of stuff. I see a hill, I see a park, maybe I'll see a dog or a frisbee. My first instinct is going to be to walk around and see what all is everywhere. And then, once I'm comfortable with that, I'm gonna go maybe do a few challenges, maybe run up the hill or play frisbee with somebody. I really cannot stress enough how important it is that Super Mario 64 lets players take it in how they want to. It's a game that implements difficulty control through its own design instead of through arbitrary difficulty modes. And also not in that smarmy Dark Souls just find this specific ring and it'll be a lot easier sense. Super Mario 64 is the best of both linear and open world design. Players are able to choose which levels they like and which ones they don't. If they find Lethal Lava Land too hot to handle, they can try to find a few of the stars in Dire Dire Docks instead. You need only 70 stars to climb the infinite staircase, fight Bowser, and watch the credits roll. The developers consider that a fair playthrough, and you can do that in a few hours if you stick to the earlier levels and really focus on getting all of those stars. A lot of the more challenging levels aren't even necessary to beat the game. So if you're not good at it but you still want some fulfillment from it, you can still beat the game by getting the easier stars. I mean, challenges aside, you're not really missing out on much by not getting every single star. Just a couple messages from the developers and a cute little cameo. But if you're a challenge seeker and you want to collect all 120 stars, go ahead. If you want a harder experience but don't have a lot of time on your hands, focus on the harder levels. If you really hate the swimming levels with a passion, you don't have to play them. It's brilliant. The entire experience is set up to be just as easy or just as difficult as the player wants it to be. You can organically set the difficulty as you go along. Lives don't really have a consequence aside from just returning you to outside the castle, meaning you have effectively infinite lives. It's like Mega Man, but easier. And you don't have to play the whole thing to get a satisfactory experience out of it either. With that being said, however, there are exactly 5 levels that every player absolutely must play through before the credits roll. And this is where that organic difficulty thing really becomes interesting. The first level is Bob-omb Battlefield. We just talked about how great of a tutorial that level is when it comes to introducing players to how the game works. And the third is a weird sort of swimming tour thing that doesn't really have much of a challenge to it. I really want to talk about the other 3, the Bowser levels. Because even though they are mandatory levels for the player, they show how much care and attention the designers of this game put into making the difficulty as adaptable as possible. The Bowser levels are straightforward, linear challenges. They're a bit of an homage to the 2D stages of earlier Mario games since they have a similar side-to-side camera angle. They act as a bit of a challenge to interrupt whatever the player's up to, but the player can take them on anytime they want to. They're not forced to do so unless they really want to move on to the next area of the castle. So already, the easygoing nature of the game's difficulty applies to these levels. These levels are sometimes tricky, and the boss at the end is always a fun challenge, but it's never really overwhelming, even for someone who isn't that good at the game. Even if you dropped an absolute beginner into one of these levels at the start of the game, the negative space on the right-hand side of the screen, and the oblivion that lies everywhere else except to the right, does a good job of implying where to go. But what makes them really cool is how they use the third dimension to introduce weird things off the beaten path. Because the Bowser levels in this game add something that gives them a huge wrinkle: red coins. There are 8 red coins sprinkled throughout every level in the game, not just the Bowser levels. If you collect them all in a level, you get a star. But I think it's extraordinarily smart how they implement them in the Bowser levels, because then that organic choose-your-own difficulty applies even to the most linear of levels. When you happen into a fork in the road in these levels, you already know which one will lead to Bowser, the one that goes the way you're already facing. The red coins are often in paths that lead either into the background or the foreground, or in some other direction that would be impossible to gauge in only 2 dimensions. Like, take this little area in Bowser and the Fire Sea. At the top of this hill is a path leading to a bully that you can knock off a ledge and get a red coin. This whole challenge is optional. You don't have to knock it into the lava and get the coin, you can just move on and play the rest of the level. But it's like a treat. It's a little reward for climbing a hill that is a lot harder to climb than you might think. It seems so obvious in retrospect, but that is such freaking good design. It's taking this Z-axis and using it to give players an extra challenge if they want it. Now you could probably argue that other Mario games like Galaxy or Sunshine did this a whole lot better, but for me personally, it's the historical aspect that makes this game so important. I mean, this was one of the first 3D platformers ever. Nintendo knew they had to get it right, because they knew if they didn't get it right, then players wouldn't be able to play a game like this again. They wouldn't be willing to. It wouldn't have caught on. That's the reason you don't see a different Mario game on this list. Mario 64 was just the only one in my mind to truly nail the adaptive difficulty thing down. Before Mario 64, the Mario series had been composed of linear sets of challenges. You'd beat a level, and you'd move on to the next one. Maybe you'd find a hidden exit and take a different path of linear challenges, but never to the extent of being able to forego entire challenges just because of their difficulty. Mario Sunshine came close, but with fewer worlds and more gimmicks, it just couldn't capture that same magic. While the individual levels are much larger and packed with more things to do, you still have to progress through them in a linear fashion. And I suppose the same is true of Mario 64, but think about how many levels opened up at once when you got a certain amount of stars. It was like 5 or 6 at a time in Mario 64, but in Sunshine it's just 1 at a time. Mario Galaxy and its sequel came even closer, but at that point we were entering an era where the 3D platformer was intuitive enough that they could just experiment with even more ideas like planetoids and zero gravity and just so much stuff. And look, I understand that a lot of this comes down to personal preference. I know a lot of people who think very, very highly of Galaxy and its sequel, and I do too. I mean, even Super Mario Sunshine has its fans. I mean, that was my first Mario game growing up, and I had a blast playing it. But because of the circumstances surrounding Mario 64's creation, I have to admire it. It's a snapshot of an industry that succeeded in tackling the problem of 3D. It was one of the first games to truly shatter the polygon ceiling, and prove that the third dimension was not only gimmicky, but necessary for the rest of the medium to move forward. It was a trailblazer, just like the very first Super Mario Bros. Was. Those circumstances are what made Super Mario 64 as good as it is. It's why the difficulty is so perfectly adaptable. It's why all the levels are so unique and fun. It's why all the care that went into this game in the first place, is because 3D just wasn't there yet, and Nintendo knew they had to do something special. Also consider that beyond the third dimension, this is Mario without gimmicks. This isn't Mario in space, or Mario with a water jetpack. This isn't the one with the Yoshi, or the one with the Tanuki suit. This is just plain Mario. It's the definitive Mario. Consider how the Mario games that came after 64 open. Sunshine opens with a catastrophe, with a crisis that already needs to be solved. Galaxy and its sequel also open this way, but this time with a linear path leading up to the crisis. The sequel even starts in 2D, as if to exemplify this design. In both of those cases, the player is given an opportunity to jump around and see how Mario controls. It's a pretty good tutorial. But because Mario 64 came out at a time when 3D gameplay was still foreign, it opened like this. Silence. A brief message telling you to move towards the castle, followed by pure atmosphere. This isn't a path leading to the castle. This is a large, empty courtyard. This is where you learn to play Super Mario 64. You learn how to jump, you learn how to dive. If you experiment with different timings, you can learn Mario's different bags of tricks. If you decide to hop in the pond at the far right, you can learn how to swim. It's all silent. There's no music, no pressure, no plot aside from the fact that Princess Peach has baked you a cake. It's the perfect playground to get your feet wet and learn how this three-dimensional space works. This kind of design thinking couldn't happen today. It shows a commitment to the evolution of game design beyond 2 dimensions. It shows respect for the player, who has no idea how a 3D world works. It's a wonderful and considerate design decision. And if the huge audience Mario still has today is anything to run by, it really paid huge dividends. Well, so what? It was mind-blowing back in the day. A lot of games were mind-blowing back in the day. I mean, we were just talking about Star Fox when the video started. Even today, a lot of games are pretty mind-blowing. Just look at all the stuff that people are doing with VR. But are you really going to want to play half the games that are coming out on VR 20 years from now? No. Not really. Maybe a couple of them if they're really good, but not all of them. No, Super Mario 64 was mind-blowing when it came out, but it's still a fantastic play today. The graphics are polygonal but expressive. The design is thoughtful and timeless. And it's just so much fun! The race against the big penguin, that crazy rainbow ride level that challenged you at every turn, the crazy stuff you can do with a cannon and a pair of wings, the clock level, the boo go round, the moment when you jump into the volcano and find out that it's way bigger on the inside. It's a game full of memorable, fun stuff. It's still a joyride to this day, but it's a joyride that anyone can enjoy, whether they're new to platformers or if they've been playing them for 20 years.
I swear, it's not just nostalgia talking. I first played this game in high school. As I mentioned before, my first Mario game was Super Mario Sunshine. I'd played a lot of Mario games before this one, but this game's really something special. The kind of care they put into making 3D really work for the player is something you really only see Nintendo do anymore, even if the other 3D Mario games aren't really nearly as earth-shattering. Look, Nintendo's getting old. They're getting desperate. They're trying a lot of new things. And I hope they put as much care and attention into those new things as they did into this game. Because it deserves it. I mean, they could make the Wii Remote work. They can make anything work. They just have to put care into it. But for now, I really need some cake. Running around really tires you out, you know? Whew.